rumination and overthinking lead to many negative consequences, such as depression, anxiety, binge eating, binge drinking, and in general self-destructive behaviour. So how can we stop ruminating? The first tip would be to make sure that when you think about a problem, you're not problem-oriented, you're solution-oriented. You don't fixate on the negative emotions attached to the problem, the difficult situation you're in now. Instead, focus on how can you get out of that difficult situation. You definitely want to make sure that you don't ignore problems. This would be toxic positivity, simply ignoring the fact that things are wrong, because problems aren't actually that bad. Problems are very helpful. They show us that something is wrong. And if you don't listen to these warning signs, then you're going to go down a path that isn't good for you. In fact, thinking about solutions for problems is extremely beneficial. Tim Ferriss, for example, instead of doing goal setting, what he does is what he calls fear setting. Basically, yes, writing down all his fears, all the things he thinks may go wrong when he pursues his goal, but not concentrating on how bad he feels about those, how afraid he is of those. But what he also does, and this is the more important aspect of this exercise, is that he writes down how he's going to repair that damage in case it goes wrong, so that he's prepared, and so that when things go wrong, he can be optimistic about the fact that he knows how to handle this difficult situation. Then the second tip would be that when we overthink, we usually think, what would happen if? So basically, to make sure that we don't overthink, don't let it happen that you have to think about what would happen if I did so and so. Simply quickly try it out, because then you've got the answer and then you don't have to think about it over and over again. And then when you notice that that was not a good decision, then you can quickly go back, and now you actually know that that decision wasn't too good, and you can go on with your life without thinking about what would have happened if I had done so and so. And this is why both Ed Milet and Jocko Willink often talk about how important it is to be decisive. A third reason why we overthink, that is because we expect ourselves to make the best decision that we could possibly make. The problem is we don't have all the information, and we don't have access to all the information to know whether that decision is really good or not. So instead of having this high expectation of yourself to make the best decision, even though you haven't got all the information, just expect the best decision you could make based on what you currently know and the information you actually do have access to, because we don't know what will happen in future. What also happens when we overthink is that we either think about the past, the future, or the third option of what we usually think about when we overthink is criticizing ourselves. The remedy for this, and this would be the fourth tip, would be to get into a state of flow. Because what happens when we are in a state of flow is that we're in a state of hypofrontality, which means that our prefrontal cortex is shut down. Our prefrontal cortex is the brain region that is there for future planning, and that's why flow puts us in the present moment, and therefore we don't think about either the past or the future, which make us overthink. Another characteristic of flow is that we feel this kind of selflessness, because we're so engaged in the present, so engaged with the task that we're currently doing, that we don't have the time to actually think about how bad we feel about ourselves. And then the fifth tip, instead of overthinking and ruminating, if you can't talk to someone because you feel that this is something you want to keep secret, at least write it down. A psychologist found that victims of rape, if they talked about that incident and opened up about it, their stress levels would decrease. But this would also happen if they simply wrote it down. Writing it down doesn't have as much of an effect on lowering your stress levels as talking to someone, but especially for introverts, this is way easier. And a reason why writing things down makes us ruminate less is that there are many studies that show we think about things that are uncompleted a lot. We have tasks, for example, that haven't been completed, or in general unprocessed emotions a lot. Things that we haven't dealt with pop into our minds all the time, here and there, if we don't deal with them by writing them down. For example, one study with college students, one group of those college students was assigned to think about an upcoming exam, whereas the other group simply was a control group. Now, this first group, those who had to think about their exams, this group was also split into two groups. One group was told to make plans around when they're going to study what, whereas the other group, they weren't told to do that. And then after that, they were asked to do this puzzle where they had to basically complete words. What's really interesting about this is that those people who didn't make any plans around when they're going to study what, this group, when they were filling out these words, they always came up with words relating to exams because they hadn't planned and because they had thought about that exam without planning. Their brain was kind of reminding them to somehow figure out how they're going to do that. Rumination, as I've already pointed out, often happens when we criticize ourselves a lot. If you have got that problem that you criticize yourself too much, you can watch this video here on improving your self-talk.